Welcome to Alimentary, the podcast series where you will learn about your amazing body, how it works, and of course why food is so important, and also pick up some simple recipe and lifestyle tips and tweaks to help you to influence your health in a positive way. I read a report recently which was published in 2020 in Yale Medicine, in which doctors were warning that colorectal cancer is on the rise in young adults and that it has been for several years. Yale Medicine surgeons who treat colorectal cancer are urging people, including those under the age of 45, to talk to their doctor about any suspicious symptoms such as chronic constipation, rectal bleeding, or sudden changes in bowel movements. So I thought that we would delve a little deeper into how our gut works, even at a cellular level, and also how we should nourish it to reduce our risks in the future. My guest in this episode is Thanasie Kaldanis, who has been a qualified nurse for the past 20 years. He initially worked in acute and emergency settings, and for the past 12 years he has worked as a cancer data registrar, collecting cancer data with National Cancer Registry Ireland. He's also the Health and Wellbeing Officer with local GAA Club Cornafean GAA in Cavan, where he lives. He is passionate about bringing the community together to create a healthy, thriving community for everybody. In this episode, we talk about the importance of bowel health, how vital it is that we influence younger generations' attitudes to food, and the fundamentals of our cells and tissue, which he explains so clearly. Thanasie also talks about the challenges to changing habits and how we can encourage better lifestyle choices at a community level. Our aim for this conversation is to focus on how amazing our bodies are and how important nourishment is. Finally, Thanasie explains bowel screening and why we shouldn't fear it, along with the benefits of catching disease early for us personally, our community, and actually even the health system. So I'm your host, Lynn, and I know that you will learn a lot from my conversation with Thanasie Kaldanis. So Thanasie, what has piqued your interest in informing people about bowel health?
We held a nutrition talk for teenagers in our local community and with yourself, which was brilliant. It was really more about nutrition and exercise in sport for these people. But you mentioned in the middle of it, of your presentation, about the importance of bowel health. And there was a few girls sitting behind me in their early teens, and they started giggling about it when you mentioned the word bowel health. And it got me thinking, what's the best way to promote bowel health to the area? Because my background is a nurse, and an awful lot of my nursing would be care of the elderly years ago. And a lot of them would say that they never felt right if their bowels weren't okay. And to them, it caused them discomfort if they weren't regularly as they should be. And these people had lived a lifetime and they know what a normal bowel habit is. And these people would have an awful lot of other ailments like arthritis and stuff like that. It would be bothering them, but they wouldn't mention it. They'd mention their bowels.
Yes.
So we know how much bowel health is essential and good bowel health. And a lot of us ignore it until we actually have an issue with our bowels. We take it for granted until it started causing bother to us. So I feel that it's an area at the population that really we don't hone in on until around middle age. And this could be truer of maybe general health and not just bowel health, but until about middle age, we don't start really paying attention to our health.
Because it's not something that's urgently that we need to go into hospital for. We're just constipated all the time. And, people just take that as, as their normal bowel routine,
Absolutely. And the people that we're talking about here are usually a parent or a guardian as well.
Yes.
So they have an influence on these people who are at the presentation. So there's two generations here that are affected in essence, that are not paying attention to bowel health or general health, as you'd say. It's like you are what you eat is a very true saying.
And the health of our cells is vital for our physical and our mental health. So can you explain a little bit, just, with your medical background, with your nursing background, would you mind explaining a little bit about what our cells are and how they work?
Yeah, no problem. So the cells in our body, every cell is a basic functional unit of our body. Everything revolves around the cell. And just like us, the cells are living on metabolism. So they need food, they need fluid, and they need oxygen. And they also get rid of stuff. Now, I don't like saying get rid of stuff, or people say they excrete waste and carbon dioxide. Sometimes these cells actually produce something. So what they're letting go of is very beneficial to the body, such as hormones, for example. So I don't like to say that to get rid of waste, not necessarily to get rid of waste. But in the cell, there's three main components that I'd like to think there's in the cell. So you have the wall of the cell, which is the barrier of the cell, and it's made up really of lipids or fats with proteins that reinforce it. The proteins is a kind of security guard that allows certain things in and also acts as a messenger. So you have this big wall around your cell. Inside the cell, you've got the main computer or the brain of the cell, and it's called the nucleus. Think of it maybe as the president of the cell. It tells everyone what to do. And then you have these little organelles around the cell, and that could be, if you want to think of a way, that could be the government that's supporting the president. And all the government and the president is bathing in a fluid called cytoplasm, which is mainly water. So you have this wall and you have this president and this government, and they lie in the cytoplasm, the wall. So that's the three main components of it. Now, you don't have these cells just scattered randomly around the body. They're usually together in a uniform state right beside each other. So when you have the same cell with the same structure, that they have the same function or the job and the same orientation, together they make up a thing called a tissue.
So the cells
So
in a tissue all have the same function. They have the same job to do, if you like.
they look identical.
Mm.
They have the same function, the same structure, and they support each other. So that makes up a tissue in the body.
Mm.
For example, your cardiac muscle cells are located side by side. They look the exact same. And when enough of them are together, they make up cardiac muscle tissue. Same example, the squamous epithelial lining in your mouth. They are the exact same, side by side. They look identical, the exact same job, and they make up the mucosa, the lining of your mouth. They're squamous epithelial tissue. So these tissues, they're a collection of the exact same cells, and they look the same under the microscope.
Mm.
Now, to make it very, very simply, these cells come together and make a tissue. We have 4 tissue types in the body. We have nerve tissue, we have muscle tissue, we have connective tissue, and we have a thing called epithelial tissue. And we can make it more complicated, but they split into 4 families, and that's the 4 families. For every organ in the body, whether it be the heart, the lungs, or the bowel, they will all have components of these 4 tissue types. So I started with the heart. So just for a quick example, because the heart is a nice one when you're learning about anatomy and physiology. But it's true of all organs. So we spoke about the heart and about the muscle tissue in the heart there.
Yeah.
And we know that the muscle tissue in the heart pumps blood away from the heart around the body to different places. So we know that the muscle tissue that I'm after mention is the main thing that makes the heart work. So if we wanted that heart to pump faster or harder or pump slower, the nerve tissue in the heart will tell us to do that. So that's the nerve tissue part of that as well. So we have two other tissue types as well. Now, if the heart was beating away and pumping blood and it wasn't anchored in the chest, it would just jump all around your chest.
Yeah.
So we need it to be anchored in a way that allows it to pump but not jump around everywhere. So that's where our connective tissue comes in, and it anchors to the heart, and it layers around on the outside of the muscle as well. So it protects the muscle on the outside, and it would anchor the heart in place. On the inside of this cardiac muscle, muscle, we need another layer. So the muscle isn't in direct contact with the blood that it's pumping. For two reasons: that the muscle doesn't get damaged and we don't damage the blood. The layer needs to be nice and smooth and non-adhesive, that the blood is just gliding along within the vessel that has been pumped through. That's called epithelial tissue. So you have this inner epithelial tissue, this middle muscle tissue, and this outer connective tissue, and the nerve tissue will tell the muscle what it needs to do.
That's where the signals will come through.
That's where the signals will come through and go away from as well. If it needs to tell you that you're in pain, or no, not with the heart, but with other organs, if you're in pain, or that you feel in temperature, and different things like that.
That is such a good explanation of the 4 types of tissue and their functions, Thanasie. That's brilliant.
Thanks very much. The main thing to take from that is that when I'm talking about the heart, I'm talking about a thing called a hollow organ. So the space in the heart is pumping blood, and blood is filling up that space. So in truth, anywhere in the body where anything moves is a hollow organ. So your mouth, your esophagus, your stomach, your bladder, your lungs, your bowel, they are all hollow organs, and the same tissue structure applies. So you have this inner epithelial, this middle muscle, and this outer connective, and the nerve tissue is telling the muscle in the middle to either relax or contract to move this substance along. So food, fluid, the air we breathe, urine, feces, blood, they all flow through these structures. And these structures are made up of these cells that we already spoke about, and they have these lipid walls with the protein in them and the cytoplasm, the nucleus in each cell. So all these little components add together to make this structure or organ work.
And so obviously we need to make sure that those cells within those structures are healthy and can function with the fuel and the raw materials that they need. So are there any nutrients that you consider to be particularly vital for our cells to remain healthy?
Absolutely. There's quite a number of them. The main source of energy for most cells in the body would be glucose, which, as you know, is made up from sugar or carbohydrate molecules. For our walls, we said we had a lipid wall with proteins in them. Well, very simply, we need lipids in our diet and we need proteins in our diet. And the cytoplasm is made of water. Now, that's in a very crude form what I'm saying here. We need good carbohydrates, we need good lipids, and we need good proteins and water. That's a very basic structure of a generalized cell, what I'm talking about. We also need lots of electrolytes, such as potassiums and sodiums, calcium and magnesiums, and vitamins also, because the proteins in the cell wall will be very selective in what it takes in, and it will take only the amount of, for example, potassium or sodium that it needs, or magnesium, and take that into the cell, depending on which cell it is.
Yes, they'll have different requirements.
They'll have different requirements. So in this very basic structure, we need very generalized blocks of quality food to take in. Now, that's where your expertise comes in that. But let's think about the cells in our bowel. So there's a couple of things going on here. We need the water, we need the carbohydrates, we need the fats, we need the proteins, the vitamins and minerals. So these cells can survive and function. So for them to feed, if you take in your quality food, and for them to actually get them ingredients, they are absorbed from the blood. Now, the blood gets them from the stomach and the small intestine. That's where they are absorbed from when you eat. So it goes around your blood and it bathes into these cells, and the cells take what it needs, and the rest of it passes by, and it just goes around in a systemic fashion around the body. When we're eating and it's been absorbed in the small intestine, the rest of what we eat that isn't absorbed will eventually be excreted in the form of feces or poo. We'll call it poo. We'll call it very generalized here.
I think that might have been the bit where the girls were giggling when I was talking about pooping every day.
That's right. That's right. It was, but when you're young, when you're
oh, absolutely.
Even when you're at a younger stage, sure, the amount of jokes that originate from that subject.
Exactly.
So what happens is you have all these nourishing ingredients going through the blood to feed the bowel cells. But at the same time, the bowel's function is to push along the part of what you've ingested that's not needed. So it's pushed along into the large bowel, eventually through the small bowel into the large bowel. And it's packaged originally in a kind of it goes from a very liquid state to a semi-solid state to a solid state as it's going through the journey through the bowel, that it'll end up in a solid form of feces. The feces is quite toxic and it shouldn't be held up against the bowel wall too long. The lining of the bowel is an epithelial lining. Now, this lining of the bowel actually excretes substances as well. So there's a glandular epithelial cells in this as opposed to a non-glandular, which we usually predominantly is a squamous epithelial cell. So we have to be able to move this feces in quite a smooth fashion, that it doesn't stay in one part of the bowel too long.
And this is where, first of all, it's a muscle that pushes the food through the bowel. So obviously, we want the cells of those muscles to be in good shape. But as you mentioned, if you're constipated chronically, there's going to be a bit of an issue, isn't there?
There's going to be a major issue.
Mm.
So we've nourished our cells that make up the bowel wall. So the bowel wall consists of where the feces is pushing through, you have this epithelial, a glandular epithelial lining. Underneath this, you will have the bowel muscle, which is predominantly moving, transporting the feces along, and then you have the outer connective tissue. And they're all being bathed in what we eat. They've been fed by the food that we eat is broke down into the blood. So we need to have them in a really, really good state. More so the epithelial tissue, because the epithelial tissue will need to be in really tip-top shape because it's coming into contact with this toxic feces. Now, feces usually transports itself through the bowel within about 24 hours. And as it goes through the bowel, it's nearly like a factory. It goes through like a processing stage. So certain things are absorbed back into the bloodstream as you go along, and the feces turns from liquid to semi-solid to solid. So you have the reabsorption of water back into the body. Certain vitamins are made through the gut bacteria, and they are absorbed back into the blood, and certain electrolytes will go through it as well. So it can't be rushed. So you just can't as soon as the feces gets into the bowel, you just can't rush it straight out in a liquid form. It's a bit like Goldilocks eating the porridge. It has to be just right. The timing has to be just right within the bowel. And this is actually known as your stool transit time. And you don't want it too quick because you won't get your reabsorption, absorption, and formation.
That's your diarrhea.
That's right. But your absorption, you lose an awful lot of electrolytes through diarrhea, and an awful lot of your gut health is lost and your bacteria will be lost. That's very, very beneficial in the gut. If it's too slow, then you get too much absorption of the water back into the blood and your stool becomes very, very hard and you get constipated. And this toxic stool spends too long in contact with the glandular epithelial tissue. So if you eat and drink good, wholesome food, you will absorb good quality lipids, carbohydrates, proteins, and water into the blood, which will nourish these cells.
And it's a cycle.
Oh, absolutely, it's a cycle, and it's a good cycle to be on. But at the same time, the contents of your bowel that produces the feces will be high quality, more than likely high fiber. While it'll still be toxic, it definitely will have a more correct stool transit time, and definitely will not be as bad as the food that's high in preservatives and chemicals, because that'll be sitting in the feces, touching the glandular epithelial tissue. So good food produces good cells, produces good feces, so it's a good win-win situation for your bowel. If you put low-grade food in, maybe add on alcohol and cigarettes with that'll go through your blood and it'll end up with poorer quality cells. Inevitably, you will end up with poorer quality stools that will be in direct contact with this more poorer state of an epithelial tissue cells that's be touching it.
Yeah,
so the body will have.
It's like those cells are malnourished nearly.
They're malnourished cells having to deal with a higher toxic feces. So the body will struggle with this eventually.
Sausage shape is the perfect shape, isn't it, Thanasie? And it's sort of a mid-brown color.
It is, and it's kind of I don't know if it's a taboo subject, but people don't like to look at their poo or talk about their poo.
No.
And,
People
you
don't
know,
even
as
like looking at a stool chart, in fairness as well, you know?
no, and I was just going to say, make that point. As nurses, we've been looking at the Bristol stool chart for years in wards
Yeah.
to identify the shape and quality of the poo that the patient has. Now, people might be surprised by me saying that, but
I was when I started a clinic first, and I would actually be a bit self-conscious showing people a stool chart and asking them to talk about their poop. And now it does not cost me a thought, because I find it really interesting. Do you know? Because it'll tell you something. It gives you some information to go on. But I understand that, people can. It's such a personal thing, that people can feel a little bit wary about talking about it, or self-conscious about talking about it.
it's well, maybe in different countries it might be a little more open, but in
Yeah.
Ireland, I know certainly we're
Yeah.
quite
And
reserved when we talk about it.
And it's great if we understand it ourselves, then we can kind of, it'll tell us a little bit about our bowel health, and we'll know if we actually need to address something and go and see, like, whether it's a nutritionist or whether it's your GP, or another therapist. So it's actually a really good thing to be talking about. It's a little bit more information that people can have about their own body, and how it's doing, how it's performing. So, Thanasie, the point of our chat today was to inform people about their body and about how it works and how cells work, to encourage people to, have a healthy lifestyle. So, movement, eating good whole foods, hydration, rest, good night's sleep, so that we can reduce the risk of illness. But also, the second point is that screening is hugely important, and you're a big advocate of screening. Could you just explain why it is so important?
Yeah, we currently have three screening services in Ireland, and they're run through the National Screening Service. So we've bowel screen, we've cervical check, and breast check. So the lower the stage of the cancer at diagnosis, increases the likelihood and of survivability and curability of the cancer. It's been shown with these three sites, with the bowel, with the cervix, and with the breast, that if you diagnose at an earlier stage, perhaps before you have symptoms, that you can identify this cancer at a far earlier stage. This will then result in less invasive cancer treatments and will increase the likelihood of survivability and hopefully curability with these sites. So what you might actually get initially when you introduce a screening is that more cancers are diagnosed, but they're diagnosed earlier. There's less of a burden on the person that is diagnosed with, and there's less of a burden on the health system, both in terms of initial treatment and then subsequent treatment. You're more likely to have subsequent treatment if you're diagnosed at a later stage. So it's got a double positive impact. And that's not taken into account the impact it would have on the person's family or friends or community or their work, driving to appointments or more intensive treatments and recovery time. So it's been shown that if you can, especially in where screening is applicable in these sites, that there is a double win effect.
Do you think that our health system is facing sort of challenges at the moment? I mean, I think that those screening services are good. I just get notified about my appointments every couple of years. But do you think that the health system is challenged when it comes to those screening services? And do you see any improvements maybe happening in these areas?
Well, there's always room for improvement, first of all, but it's a kind of a big question with the health system, the challenge with the health system and then screening.
Mm,
So I'll try and keep this simple. So I talked about earlier, we'll talk about bowel screening, for example. I talked about, like, no one really wants to talk about their poo. That's the first real barrier in the likes of bowel screening. Health promotion for these screenings, they have to be marketed and advertised effectively, and that's not always easy. Now, we are getting an awful lot better. So
mm,
the health promotion has to be effective, and we are an awful lot better educated than we were years ago.
mm.
But I would say we have to be, and that's a huge challenge because more and more shop shelves, they're packaged with more and more processed foods, and kids are becoming more consumed with sugar and these processed foods. And not just kids, young and middle-aged adults, they're eating similarly. And these are the providers and educators of the kids. So there's two generations here that really, by the time they reach these screening ages, like for bowel screen, it might be too late. The screening, by the time they hit the age of 59 for screening, the screening might have to start earlier in their lives.
That's the worry, isn't it? It's the fact that people are addicted to the processed foods, and also it's the convenience. They seem to be the biggest challenges to people improving their lifestyle choices.
Absolutely right there. There's a bigger picture here, Lynn, as well. So, and again, this is my own opinion and it's very much generalized, but if you go into the hospital setting, and not just about bowel care or cancer care, the hospitals are full with people. That's always in the news. There's more and more people coming in with significant comorbidities that are appearing at an earlier age. So what does that tell you? It means that we're having to treat sick people earlier in their lives. And this treatment takes a significant amount of time and cost the healthcare budget a significant amount. If these people are needing intervention at an earlier age, then they're off work and they're not earning. So just think about this for a second. If they're not earning, they're not paying taxes. And if they're not paying taxes, they're not contributing to the government budget. Now, it might sound crude in that, but if that's the case, then there's less in the pot for other services such as health promotion. And that's the first point I want to make on that. Now, if you go back to them ill people that I mentioned, this illness that they're having that's causing this comorbidity, not just cancer, it didn't happen or occur overnight. It's usually caused by 10 or 20 or 30 years of a poor lifestyle habit. So ideally, prevention, they always say, is better than cure. So if we can prevent that this person stays in a positive, healthy cycle for longer, and that they only experience ill health at the end of their lives instead of ill health for a greater proportion of their lives, then they will pay more taxes. There's more in the pot, and there's more opportunity for healthy living infrastructure and health promotion initiatives, such as and research and screening services as well.
Yeah.
I mean, very cold in that fact, but that's brass tacks when you're looking at planning. And the win-win after that is the physical and mental health of the person and their family.
And their family. There is a ripple effect, yeah.
And you can't calculate that cost.
It has such an emotional impact on obviously the cancer patient, but also on the family and friends. And as you say, it impacts not just their mental health, but also their financial health, their lifestyle. It's everything changes once that diagnosis happen. Obviously, none of us are going to live forever, but as you said earlier, if we're getting those diagnoses much later in life, look, that's an improvement in itself. It has to be a sign. The fact that people are being diagnosed younger, has to be a sign that there's something in our lifestyles that is not helping the situation.
It's been well established in research, Lynn, that's what's happening. While statistically they're saying that we're living longer, we're living with polypharmacy, which is about 4 or 5 tablets a day at an earlier age.
Yeah.
And so we're living with chronic conditions, whereas while generations before us died at an earlier age, their chronic conditions didn't happen until very, very late in life.
Yeah. Yeah. So they had a better quality of life through their life.
Proportionally, yes, they would have had.
Yeah. Obviously now we have people living longer, but maybe the last 10 years of their life are not good quality. So we want to improve the quality of our life as long as we can.
You're right. I was at a conference with Professor Niall Moyna from Dublin, and he's from Monaghan, man. But it was actually living with chronic conditions was an awful lot earlier in their life what the projections are.
Yeah,
it's quite scary what it is.
So it's really just promoting those healthy lifestyle changes and making mindful choices about what we're eating and obviously what we're feeding our younger generation as well.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there with the younger generation. So, you speak about this positive, healthy cycle that you need to be on, and let's call it as it is. We're all busy people and we're working and we're finding it difficult to find that work-life balance. If you're like in the community, if you offer health education and service in the community, you're more than likely going to see that the people that I mentioned, the young and middle-aged adults, they attend the least. They're too busy.
Yeah.
But these are the people that bang for buck, a positive lifestyle change will have the biggest impact, not just on them, but on their families, on their children. And again, remember, it's the poor lifestyle choices that's laid down over these years that cause the comorbidities in years ahead. So if you're middle-aged and you probably had a relatively low processed diet in the younger life, but now you're having a high processed diet, you're going to hit in the later years the comorbidities. But if you are influencing children and teenagers with that diet as well, they're going to experience that earlier in their lives. Our bodies are very, very sophisticated and they're very adaptable, but constantly being bombarded with poor ingredients, it will eventually take its toll.
That's, such a good point. If you make a positive food choice, you're actually investing in your future self. So, Thanasie, what challenges do you see that people are facing in the community, or what work is being carried out in the community, to help and support people to make positive changes to their lifestyle?
Yeah, so there's going to be loads of challenges there, Lynn. For some people, getting on that healthy life cycle isn't easy and they need encouragement. And maybe that could be from a friend or from a specialist such as yourself. That change doesn't happen by accident and it takes effort, and the community can have a major influence here. But there's a collective responsibility too. There has to be some form of government input, local council input, and from individuals too, which is happening in fairness in terms of grant funding. Um, but this approach, the benefits, and while it's difficult, the benefits that you get far outweigh the initial effort. So it's about making the positive change, and even a little one like joining a community group, such as a men or a women's walking group or a swimming group in the community. I single out men just there because men tend to have a greater uptake if it's men only for some forms of exercise, that they don't feel as self-conscious when they're surrounded by other men. Once that cycle has started, I feel that every other step is less of a challenge because the sort of the stigma is broken down. In my area where I'm from in Cavan, and a big shout out to Cornafean GAA Club and its community, we started doing this in 2024 with men on the move evenings and over 60s exercise classes, and bringing back the indoor bowls and outdoor skittles and couch to 5K. And we noticed a dramatic increase in uptake and positivity that's going around the area. Physical and mental health improves straight away. And as you know, that produces endorphins and it makes you feel good about yourself. And if you're in a group with that happening, there's a sense of community and people feel part of that group and invested into it. So it's, again, we talk about these win-win situations that it can't be measured. And it's not only, we're talking about, I'm advocate of bowel health. So together, everyone becomes more stronger and there's more shoulders to support if they're needed. So the more people that we've seen that's become involved, the more people will follow. And it becomes a habit, their habit of attending on a Monday evening or a Monday morning or a Thursday. And that becomes the norm. That becomes the expectation of what their week is going to look like. So it kind of it has a knock-on effect for all ages in the community because it's kind of infectious and it spreads through your family and your friends and your community then. And, you're talking to someone, oh, come on down to the Men on the Move on the Monday, or we're doing bowls on a Thursday evening. It's good crack. And the people are saying to me there, like, especially at winter nights, like, we'd only be sitting down watching the telly. Instead, we're in the hall and we're playing bowls and there's a bit of exercise and we're talking with friends and, it's just a whole positive influence. So the community just has such a major impact on individuals and it has a knock-on effect for everybody involved in that community. And your community actually gets bigger and more tightly connected once you can introduce an intervention like that.
That's amazing. And they get great support in your community centre for sure. And really well attended as well. Your talks are well attended. And for a community that's fairly rural, it's very active.
It is very active, and I just want to highlight we're still that age group of middle to or young and middle aged adults. They're not as well attended as other age groups, but as I said, it has to become the norm. It has to become established, and it has to become this is what we're doing. And eventually, you have to just persevere with this, that it's just not for 1 year and it closes down, because you just have to know that it's there for them and that there's a positive influence, and it'll slowly sleep in. And I'm confident that it'll slowly sleep in that way, that fashion.
Thanasie, just to finish off, would you mind just explaining what's involved in a bowel screening, just in terms of the patient's experience for anyone who's maybe considering it but is a bit wary about what's involved?
Yeah, no problem. So, first of all, the bowel test is free. It's been available for 10 years in Ireland, around 2014, so it's over 10 years now. And it's available in Ireland for people aged 59 to 69. Now, some people say, oh, well, why isn't it available, before that age or after that age? The statistics show that this is the age group at the moment. Now, when you're trying to bring in something, you have to bring it in a reasonable budget and time frame. So this could be extended by the government, before this age or after this age, if the figures suggest that it would be beneficial.
Yeah.
So they just haven't picked 59 to 69 without justification, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So it's a free test and you need to register it. And if you go on to bowelscreening.ie, there is a phone number and a website as well that you can, or an email address that you can contact them. You will be offered your first home screening test between your 59th and your 61st birthday, so a 2-year period, and then you're offered one every 2 years after that. So the test that you get will be posted out to your house, your address, and the screen involves taking a sample of your poo using this home test. Now, it sounds a wee bit daunting, but there is instructions in the packet and there is a video on the bowel screening website. So it's not as complicated as it might seem. If information on the especially the video is quite helpful. So the sample that you take will be placed in a special tube, a sealed tube. Then after you've taken the sample, and then you send it back in a sealed envelope. Now, once that bowel screening receives it, they send it to the laboratory. And what they're going to do there is they're going to check for invisible evidence of blood. So while your poo looks normal to the naked eye, they're going to look at it in depth in the microscope, and they're going to see if there is acceptable levels of blood or not. And if that acceptable level is above a reasonable limit, and I just want to say, Lynn, there's many reasons why it can be above that limit, you will be referred for a colonoscopy. I just want to say, if you are called for a colonoscopy, and I want to reassure that, it does not mean that the person has bowel cancer. It means that they just need to be checked up.
Yeah.
And that's it. You're on the system then until you're 16, until you're wherever that 2-year period when you go up to 69 finishes.
Great. And so that's actually, you don't even have to leave your house. You're actually doing that initial bowel screening from home. And it can, as you say, even if you get referred for colonoscopies check for lots of things like polyps and, other issues. It's not to be afraid of at that stage.
Absolutely not. There's loads of conditions in the bowel that are very easily treated. It might be nothing at all. It just could be, you might have a bit of constipation and you might have just eroded that little epithelial lining just slightly to cause a little bit of a bleeding in your poo, and then it heals and it's fine. So there's loads of things it could be.
Exactly. And that's where your power and your strength lie, really, isn't it? In understanding what's happening, and then you can do something about it.
It is, but I just want to make one more point on that anyone, you don't have to be outside that age group, but anyone can look up the bowel screening website and you can see, if you are outside that age, the symptoms that you might have, that an altered bowel habit, or you might notice some blood in your stool or a dark color in your stool. If you're concerned in any way, that you contact your GP, you can still go for a colonoscopy just for a checkup.
Yeah.
So it's very important. Like we know when we're not right because our bowel is telling us we're not right sometimes. So if you're in any way concerned, you can contact your GP in regards to that.
Exactly. Especially if you've made the changes to your food, your hydration. If you feel like your diet is good and you still have these symptoms, it will be really important to chat to your GP at that stage, no matter what age you are.
Absolutely.
Super. That's so good, Thanasie. You have a great way of explaining complicated things. So thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome, and thanks very much for having me.
My thanks again to Thanasie for his time and for some great information. Now, the store cupboard staple for this episode is a fermented food, which is really good for our gut, and it's probably the one that we're most familiar with, and that's yogurt. Now, the earliest historical mention of yogurt is found in the history of Genghis Khan from the 13th century in Central Asia. And it was said that yogurt was a healthy staple in the diet of his army. Yogurt and other fermented food have certainly been a staple in the diets of people living in Central Asia, Russia, and Eastern Europe for centuries. But an awareness of their health benefits really only came to Western Europe and North America in the 20th century. And this was thanks to the work of a scientist called Dr. Mechnikov, whose research focused on the benefits of the bacteria in fermented foods. And he was looking particularly at people in Bulgaria who lived really long lives. So yogurt is made by adding bacterial cultures to dairy milk, or since the 1970s, soya milk also. And these bacteria are traditionally Lactobacillus bulgaricus, Lactobacillus acidophilus, Bifidobacterium lactis, and Streptococcus thermophilus. So you'll probably recognize those terms from, your bottles of probiotics. So there are many yogurts on our supermarket shelves, but really the best to buy is natural or plain yogurt because they're the lowest in sugar and the most wholesome. As an aside, people often ask about the difference between yogurt and kefir. So kefir contains different bacteria to yogurt. So yogurt contains transient bacteria, which help to keep our GI tract clean and feeds our good bacteria. And kefir has strains which can seemingly, add to colonize our gut together with beneficial yeasts, which can help to control pathogenic or destructive yeasts in our body. So getting back to yogurt, in addition to the beneficial bacteria, which is so good for our gut, both dairy and soya will also contain other nutrients, vitamins and minerals. So things like, you'll get vitamin B2, B5, B7, B12, phosphorus, selenium, zinc and potassium and calcium from your dairy yogurt. And then soy yogurt will have vitamin C, protein again, iron, B6, B12, magnesium, calcium, vitamin D. And also soya contains isoflavones. And isoflavones are particularly good for women in menopause because they can support controlling hot flashes, improving skin health, and also, they can be associated with a reduction in the risk of some cancers. So consuming yogurt regularly is a great way to include a fermented food, which we know is great for our gut health and which supports our immune health also, and obviously to get other vitamins and minerals into our diet. So the best yogurt to buy is natural, and that can be dairy or soya if you're dairy intolerant. Now, they all contain protein. Greek yogurt would have the highest protein content. Now, be careful, you'll see some which say Greek style yogurt, but Greek yogurt has the highest content. It's a really thick and creamy yogurt, so actually, if you like the taste of it, it's a great substitute for cream. You can use yogurt in so many ways. Even if you don't think that you like the tart taste of natural yogurt, you could make your own flavoured yogurt by popping it with some berries or some frozen fruit into a wee blender and blend it up to make your own. You could also add it into a smoothie, of course, 2 or 3 tablespoons into a smoothie. I actually add it into my pancake mixture now. So a couple of tablespoons. So that's adding protein into the pancake mixture along with the eggs, and you can, of course, top your pancake with it with a drizzle of maple syrup and some berries too. You can top a dessert with it, like a crumble or, an apple tart or something. You could, or just a fruit bowl, of course. Yogurt is great with a fruit bowl. If you're making a potato or a coleslaw a dressing, that's usually traditionally with mayonnaise, but you could go half and half mayonnaise, half yogurt, if you don't want to go totally yogurt. Of course, it's brilliant with chia overnight oats, so you can definitely add in a couple of tablespoons into those. And you can just make a plain little snack pot with your yogurt, topped with some berries or kiwis, and then of course with some nuts and seeds for extra protein and crunch. It's so handy and nutritious, and hopefully there is enough information there to encourage you to add some more whole foods into your shopping trolley this week. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I just wanted to clarify that the podcast is for informational purposes only and does not substitute professional care from a doctor or trained health professional, nor constitute medical advice or services if you're in a position to need either. However, if you found it interesting, you can subscribe to make sure you don't miss future episodes, or sign up for my newsletter on lynsharkynutrition.ie.